you couldn't go to church because of the danger of the magic virus, but you could go to the riots and protests. My team and I started to look at the riots. And so we made, if you come into Solari, there's a database called COVID-19, and I think it's COVID-19 riots and Fed. So the first thing we did is we looked at the state and we looked at the cities and whether the governor was Democrat or Republican, and then what the COVID cases and deaths were. And then we said, okay, we're going to check a box called riots, where riots have been. So we started to look at the patterns of the riots vis-a-vis the political machine control and sort of the COVID magic virus op. And there was something wrong when I was looking at the data, and I could feel, I'm a very intuitive person. I was saying, there's something here. So I said to the wonderful teammate who was building this, I said, do me a favor. I want you to put a box called the Federal Reserve. And I want you to check the box. There are 12 banks, one headquarters, and then the branches for a total of 37 locations. I want you to check the box wherever, in any city where we have a branch or a bank or the headquarters, I want a check. And what we discovered is 34 of the 37 bank locations have riots. And I said, well, wait a minute, that's a pattern. There's something here. Let's drill down. So we started with Minneapolis, and we said, let's take the data of all the buildings that were harmed or burnt or businesses, and we'll map it. We'll do a GIS software, and we'll map where these businesses were and how close they were to the Federal Reserve Bank. And so the first one we did, there's a street going across Minneapolis called Lake. And we mapped them. And one of the things we did when we mapped them was we drew pictures of where the opportunity zones were. Do you know what an opportunity zone is? An opportunity zone is a tax shelter mechanism created in 2018 to help the tech billionaires, as they sold their stock, avoid capital gains. So you can, if you're Jeff Bezos, who sold $10 billion of stock this year, if you were to roll over your proceeds into opportunity zone investments and handle it in a certain way, you could avoid all capital gains tax. So this is fantastically profitable. Now, if you look at the riots, when I first saw how all the buildings and businesses destroyed along Lake Street were right at the bottom of the opportunity, I started to laugh and I said, I was Assistant Secretary of Housing. That's not a riot pattern. That's a real estate acquisition plan.
So what are you saying? It's to cheapen the prices in the city?
So I have a thriving series of small businesses, a lot owned by African American and Hispanics along a particular boulevard in the Opportunity Zone. If first I declare the business as non-essential and shut them down, right? Magic virus. So first I declare them non-essential, so now they're in real trouble, right? Because they can't do their business. And then I have riots and burn and damage them, right? If I was really clever, I'd pull their insurance right before I did it. I don't know what the case was, but we'll see. So now their business is shut down. They're now hung on their debt, right? Whether their mortgage or their credit card. But even worse, now their building has been damaged. And of course, insurance doesn't cover all the repairs and fixing, right? So needless to say, it's going to be a lot easier and cheaper for me to go in and buy up all those buildings, right? Voila. It's called disaster capitalism. So we then mapped, we did Minneapolis, then we mapped Kenosha, then Portland, and now we're doing a place in Ohio. And the patterns we're seeing, if you look at the clusters of where the damage is, just speaking as Assistant Secretary of Housing, those are, in my opinion, real estate acquisition plans completely, especially when they come on top of declaring all those small businesses non-essential and shutting them down or restricting them. I'm sure you got a lot of restaurants in there.
Yeah.
So, for example, if you look at San Francisco, 49% of the businesses in San Francisco are expected to be out of business by the end of the year. Do you know how much real estate you're going to be able to pick up cheap on this? It's phenomenal. Now, when you realize that if they sell their tech stocks high, they can pick it up really cheap. What's important to understand is this makes the economics of building the smart grid out in the Fed cities. Remember, I said 34 of 37 cities have a Fed bank or branch. So this makes building out the smart grid around the Fed banks much cheaper, which I'm assuming you want to do if you're going to come out with a crypto system.
Okay.
Okay, so Mr. Global is now coming to the point where,
And can you explain who's Mr. Global?
yeah, so Mr. Global is my nickname for the committee that runs the world. The defining characteristic of life on planet Earth is our real global governance system is a mystery. And think about it, it's phenomenal we live on a planet and we don't demand to know how our governance system really works. But instead it's a secret. So, I have a lot of high octane conjecture, as Dr. Phil would say, about who and what that is, but for now we'll call it Mr. Global. So Mr. Global is now implementing robotics. That's one of the new technologies that's really starting to make an enormous difference.
So can you label that? That's
Okay, so here's our robot and here's our human. And of course, the question for Mr. Global is, which is more efficient doing what? In other words, if I'm supposed to manage the planet and all the natural resources and harvest it to my benefit and make sure, my risk is reduced, how much do I want to use robots for and how much do I want to do humans for? Now, the brilliance of hooking everybody into the cloud with a crypto system, is with AI and software, I can have the humans teach the robots through the AI and software how to do all their jobs. And in fact, I was at the Aspen Institute in 2017, and I was having a discussion with a venture capitalist, sort of billionaire type, and he looked at me with these amazingly dead eyes, and he said, "Look, honey, I can take every company, completely automate it with software and robotics and fire all the humans. We don't need them anymore." I've never talked to anybody who didn't understand the riot part. Because that's a very typical old game.
Yeah.
Yeah, especially in poor neighborhoods.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. Okay, so do you want me to continue with this? So we have the Mr. Global at the top. We have the database and software systems using artificial intelligence. A very important part of this now is the satellite system that's being put up in the orbital platform. And using telecommunications and digital technology, you have the ability 24/7 to track and monitor both your humans and your robots. And the question for Mr. Global is, what's more efficient? If I can do everything with robots, then what do I do with the humans? I don't need them anymore.
So are we seeing built a kind of human farming or something?
So they would describe it as resource management. And if you look at the technocracy and the writing about technocracy, so many of us describe we're moving from whatever systems we use now to a technocracy. In a technocracy, they view, you have two different visions of the world. My vision of the world is that humans are sovereign individuals whose freedom comes by divine authority. That is what the Bill of Rights, the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution all revolve around. The image of a sovereign individual as someone who is free by divine authority. In the vision of technocracy, a human is a natural resource like a oil deposit and to be used as such. So they're not a sovereign individual, they're labor, and they are either more efficient or less efficient than a robot at different functions. In other words, what I'm saying is Mr. Global views the human race like livestock, not someone with which they share empathy and they don't view us as the same species as them. And in fact, with a lot of the biotechnology, they figure they're going to live much longer lives than we do and live very differently than we do. So there's been a real, one of the challenges with the secrecy, as one group becomes more and more technologically advanced, they separate culturally, legally, financially from all the other groups. In other words, they have literally broken away and created a separate civilization. They don't think of themselves as part of our civilization anymore.
And who is they?
Well, that's the great mystery, and that's why I call this group Mr. Global. And my personal experiences with many different people in that group and factions, but ultimately, I can't tell you who really controls. What I will tell you is the planet is run by force. And so ultimately, the question is, who is the most powerful gun? And that comes down to space. Who has the most powerful space presence, space weapons, as well as who controls the sea lanes? So traditionally, control behind the reserve currency came from control of the sea lanes. But then as we've moved into space, it's now become control of both the sea lanes and the satellite lanes. And the question is, who controls what and who has what weapons? One of the reasons you've seen a very interesting discussion in the United States for the last 2 years is Trump has been very verbal about Space Force and what is possible in space, and he'll make these allusions to our magical weapons in space, at which point the generals look at him very disapproving, like, don't talk about that. So the answer is, we don't know. We don't know. What we do know is part of the competition right now between China and America is that the player who has the most dominant position in space has the power to control the whole planet. So the Chinese have a system called the social credit system, and they're very much tying their financial transactions and different abilities to travel and do other things to your behavior. And we've seen different TV shows talk about these kinds of systems. But you're talking about a world where, and we see it in China, where most people are under 24/7 surveillance, and then their financial incentives and their financial powers relate to how well behaved they are. And I would describe it essentially as a slavery system, because there's no personal freedom. So to a certain extent, what technocracy will do is move us to a similar kind of system as the Chinese social credit system.
Where if you misbehave, you can be punished.
Right, so in theory, you have to get a certain kind of job to make a certain kind of money. In the current system, in the new system, you have to work for a certain kind of company and achieve a certain kind of prominence to be allowed to move more than 10 miles from your home, or to be allowed to fly. So there'll be a pecking order that relates to your freedoms to either travel or roam, or how much sort of access you have to resources. So how much money you can make. But remember, you're going into a system where if they believe they can automate everything with robotic software,